Most people think they know Cher, the icon, the diva, the trailblazer who's lived 10 lives in one glittering body. But what if I told you that the Cher you see, the bold, untouchable woman in sequins and heels, wasn't born from confidence, but from chaos? Before the award shows and Las Vegas stages, before the reinventions and comebacks, there was a little girl with rubber bands holding her shoes together, watching her mother disappear through the front door. Again, you've heard the voice, you've seen the costumes, but behind the eyeliner and rhinestones is a story soaked in heartbreak, survival, and a kind of loneliness that doesn't fade with fame. This isn't a tribute video, this is the real story, the one they don't show on stage. Because Cher's life isn't just one of reinvention, it's one of resurrection. And by the time we're done, you might not just respect her more, you might understand her for the very first time. Cher was born into instability, and it clung to her like a second skin. Her mother, Georgia Holt, was just 19 years old when she had her. Young, beautiful, and already burdened with dreams too heavy to carry. Her father, John Sarkeesian, was a truck driver with Armenian roots and a reputation for being charming and unreliable. The romance didn't last, and less than a year after Cher was born, the marriage collapsed. From that moment on, Cher's life became a revolving door of stepfathers, last names, and addresses. Her mother would go on to marry 7 times, twice to Cher's own father. Each new man brought hope of stability, but it never lasted. Some left quietly, others left scars. The only constant in Cher's world was change, and the only thing she learned to trust was herself. There were times when things got so bad, Georgia had no choice but to leave her daughter at a Catholic orphanage while she looked for work. Let that sink in, Cher, the future global superstar, left behind as a toddler in an institution because her mother couldn't afford to keep her at home. That kind of abandonment doesn't just go away. It buries itself deep. Money was always tight. Cher later described how she felt ashamed of her worn-out clothes and scolded for breaking shoes they couldn't afford to replace. She used rubber bands to hold them together just to make it through the school day. And while other kids learned multiplication tables or practiced handwriting, Cher was learning how to survive embarrassment, how to mask hunger, how to pretend everything was fine when nothing was. Sometimes, the family's fortunes would briefly improve, like the months they lived in Beverly Hills, when Georgia landed a small role or found a boyfriend with a stable paycheck. But just as quickly, it would all collapse again. One week it was spaghetti and soda, the next it was canned beans and eviction notices. The whiplash of going from hope to heartbreak over and over again created a deep, confusing anxiety in Cher's mind. She never knew what version of home she'd be waking up to. This wasn't just a hard childhood. It was the blueprint of a woman who would one day reinvent herself again and again, not for fun, but because she had to. Because survival was all she had ever known. By the time she was a teenager, Cher had already built emotional armor most adults never develop. But even armor has cracks. She wasn't like the other kids. She knew it. They knew it. And it wasn't just because of her looks, though those stood out too. It was something deeper, a sense of distance, like her mind was always somewhere else. Meanwhile, other girls were daydreaming about prom. Cher was daydreaming about escape. She wasn't picturing classrooms or college. She was imagining herself on a stage, wearing clothes no one else dared to wear, commanding attention from people who didn't laugh at her, ignore her, or walk away. Fame wasn't just a dream, it was a plan. And the thing that separated her from every other kid dreaming of stardom was simple. Cher meant it. She wasn't hoping to be discovered. She was preparing to be undeniable. At just 16 years old, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She dropped out of high school and moved to Los Angeles. No degree, no connections, no backup plan, just a fire in her gut that refused to go out. She found herself in a strange city with nothing to fall back on. She worked as a waitress. She picked up odd jobs. She did whatever it took to survive. And then she met him, Sonny. He wasn't a superstar, not yet. He was working for legendary record producer Phil Spector, doing odd jobs in the studio. Their first connection wasn't romantic. It was practical. Cher needed a place to stay. Sonny had a spare room. She moved in, initially as a kind of housekeeper, running errands and helping around the apartment. But soon, a bond began to form. He was older, 11 years her senior, but he saw something in her. Not just beauty, but presence, stage presence. Cher had this raw, magnetic quality that couldn't be taught. And Sonny, to his credit, knew how to shape talent. They started making music together, and everything changed. Their voices, when paired, were electric. Her deep, sultry alto, wrapped around his lighter, nasal tenor, created something oddly perfect. It was different, unignorable. And when they released I Got You Babe in 1965, the world responded instantly. It wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural reset. The Flower Child era had found its soundtrack. Suddenly, the girl who once held her shoes together with rubber bands was a household name. But behind the scenes, Cher's transformation was just beginning. Because while the world saw a fairy tale couple on the rise, she was slowly learning that fame doesn't fix your past, and it doesn't protect you from the person standing next to you. That lesson would come hard, and it was just around the corner. On the surface, it looked like a dream. Sonny and Cher were America's sweethearts, bohemian, bold, magnetic. He had the mustache and the business savvy. She had the cheekbones and a voice that melted through speakers. Together, they weren't just a couple. They were a brand. I Got You Babe didn't just top the charts, it captured a moment. The Vietnam War was escalating, civil rights protests were rising, the world felt unstable, and here came this young duo singing about love as if it was the only thing that made sense anymore. People clung to it. To them, the success came fast. Record deals, screaming fans, talk show appearances, magazine covers, their outfits were wild. Their love looked pure, and to the public, they became symbols of counterculture cool. But symbols don't bleed. Behind closed doors, the reality was far more complicated. Sonny wasn't just Cher's partner. He was her manager, her gatekeeper, her decision maker. Every contract went through him. Every dollar passed through his hands. He decided what she sang and how she dressed, even how she spoke in interviews. And Cher, she let him. Not because she was weak, but because she trusted him. She was still just a teenager when they met. She hadn't built her confidence yet. She had built survival instincts, yes, but not self-worth. Sonny became her translator to the world, and slowly, without realizing it, she began to disappear inside the partnership. When they tried to expand into film, things started to unravel. Their 1967 movie, Good Times, flopped. Their follow-up, Chastity, which Sonny wrote and produced as a vehicle for Cher, bombed financially and artistically. The reviews were brutal. The money dried up. Their musical style, light folk pop, was starting to sound outdated in a world embracing acid rock and revolution. They pivoted to Las Vegas. It was supposed to be a backup plan, a survival gig, but it became something more. Their lounge act introduced a new element, comedy. Suddenly people weren't just listening to the songs, they were laughing at the banter. And it was Cher, not Sonny, stealing the spotlight. Her sarcasm, her sharp timing, that dry, unbothered wit. Audiences fell in love all over again, but this time, with her. Television producers noticed, and in 1971, the Sonny and Cher Comedy Hour premiered. It was an instant hit. Their chemistry was gold, their sketch comedy fresh, their musical performances seamless. America couldn't get enough. But while their public image soared, their marriage was collapsing from the inside out. Sonny had affairs. Cher felt emotionally abandoned, and more than anything, she began to feel trapped. Trapped in a dynamic where she was the star, but not the owner of her own name. Behind the glittering sets and laugh tracks, she was quietly suffocating. Pretending on stage that everything was fine became part of the job. She wore a smile like it was a costume. Sonny knew it was falling apart. In a private diary entry from 1973, he wrote that maintaining the illusion of a happy couple was all that held their empire together. Not love, not trust, the image. But an image can only last so long. By 1974, the cracks were impossible to hide. Cher filed for divorce. Their personal and professional relationship collapsed in public view. Fans were stunned. The fantasy was over. And what came next wasn't just a heartbreak, it was a reckoning. Because when the dust settled, Cher realized something devastating. She didn't own her career. She didn't own her money. She didn't even own her name. The girl who gave her all to a man who promised to build an empire now stood alone, broke, and betrayed. But if you know anything about Cher by now, you know this isn't where the story ends. The fairy tale had shattered. The glitz was gone. And for the first time in years, Cher stood alone, not just emotionally, but financially. When she walked away from Sonny, she wasn't walking into freedom. She was walking into a mess. Because despite all the fame, the television shows, the hit songs, she had almost nothing in her name. Sonny had made sure of that. He controlled their finances, their contracts, even the trademark to Sonny and Cher. She didn't just leave the marriage, she left the business. The woman who millions believed was a megastar discovered she owed the IRS nearly $200,000 in back taxes. Her bank accounts were drained. She had no assets, no safety net. All she had was the weight of betrayal and the brutal realization that the spotlight she lived under had blinded her from everything going on behind the scenes. And here's what most people don't realize. Cher didn't bounce back instantly. There was no magical moment where she snapped her fingers and reclaimed her crown. She struggled, she hustled, she started from scratch. She launched her own television show, Cher, in 1975. And it wasn't a soft launch, it was a direct statement. She didn't just want to prove she could make it without Sonny. She wanted to own her identity this time. The show worked. The audience showed up. Ratings were strong. She proved herself, not just as a performer, but as a force. Meanwhile, Sonny tried to start his own show, the Sonny Comedy Review. It flopped, canceled after just one season. The power dynamic had flipped. But even with her name on the marquee, Cher's life behind the scenes was still turbulent. She was barely hanging on financially. Her attempts to relaunch her music career weren't landing the way she hoped. Her 1975 album, Stars, didn't chart. Neither did I'd Rather Believe in You. Cherished, released in 1977, came and went without a whisper. And in the middle of all this professional struggle, she made a deeply personal choice. She married musician Greg Allman, just 3 days after finalizing her divorce from Sonny. But it wasn't a fresh start, it was a storm. Yet despite everything, financial chaos, heartbreak, creative dead ends, Cher didn't quit, because she never quit. She kept showing up. And then, something shifted. She recorded a disco-infused album called Take Me Home, a sound she had initially resisted. It was bold, it was sexy, it was completely different from anything she had done before, and it worked. The title track became a hit. Finally, after years of reinvention and humiliation, she had a commercial win. It wasn't just a comeback, it was proof. Proof that she didn't need Sonny. Proof that she wasn't finished. Proof that the woman who'd been left behind so many times was more than just someone's sidekick or someone's wife. But fame, as Cher already knew, doesn't promise peace, and the comeback that saved her career would soon be tested by new heartbreaks, both personal and professional. Just when it seemed like Cher had found her footing again, the floor shifted beneath her, again. Take Me Home gave her a much-needed win in 1979. It was flashy, disco-driven, and soaked in the kind of glamour that made headlines. But Cher wasn't a disco queen. Not really. She was a rock and roll soul trapped in sequins, and that disconnect began to haunt her. She followed up the success with another album, Prisoner. This time, she tried to blend her disco image with more emotional, grounded songs, tracks that reflected who she really was beneath the wigs and glitter. But the result felt confused. Neither the disco audience nor the rock crowd knew what to make of it. The album barely registered on the charts. It was a gut punch. Again, every time she thought she'd found her place, the industry changed the locks. She was too edgy for the mainstream, too mainstream for the rebels, too pop for rock, too rock for pop. And now, approaching her mid-30s, a quiet question began creeping in. Was her time over? They recorded a self-titled album with a raw, heavier sound, gritty, emotional, real. But in a strange marketing decision, the label didn't even put her name on the cover. Most fans didn't know it was her, and the album flopped. Another reinvention? Ignored. Another chapter? Closed. But Cher didn't spiral. She didn't retreat. She kept evolving. Because reinvention wasn't a brand strategy for her, it was survival. She kept moving forward, because she had to. And when the music world refused to give her a seat at the table, she turned to another spotlight, Hollywood. At a time when most people would have stepped back, taken a break, or disappeared entirely, Cher, once again, decided to bet on herself. She wasn't looking for pity. She was looking for purpose. And that decision, to step away from the microphone and into the camera lens, would become one of the most important pivots of her entire life. By the early 1980s, the music industry had stopped taking her seriously. Radio had moved on. Critics called her outdated. Labels called her difficult. But Cher wasn't listening anymore. She didn't need their permission. She just needed a new stage. So she turned to acting, not as a gimmick, not as a celebrity cameo, but as a complete reinvention. She studied, she worked, she showed up to auditions with no diva demands, no special treatment. She didn't want to play herself. She wanted to disappear into characters, to prove, once again, that she was more than the costume people tried to trap her in. And in 1983, she shocked everyone. Her role in Silkwood, a quiet, complex performance, alongside Meryl Streep and Kurt Russell, earned her a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination. Audiences were stunned. This wasn't a pop star dabbling in movies. This was a serious actress, capable of depth, vulnerability, and restraint. But it was Moonstruck, in 1987, that changed everything. As Loretta Castorini, a widowed, practical Italian-American woman torn between loyalty and desire, Cher was electric. The role demanded humor, strength, heartbreak, and softness, and she delivered it all without flinching. The film became a cultural touchstone, and her performance, it won her the Academy Award for Best Actress. Think about that. This was a woman who was once laughed out of studios, and now she was holding an Oscar, not for singing, not for surviving, but for transforming. That moment wasn't just a victory, it was a full circle reckoning, a public declaration that Cher wasn't just still here, she was better than ever. And yet, while the world finally applauded her for something new, privately, another storm was already forming. Because success, as she knew all too well, doesn't shield you from suffering. And just when she had climbed out of one battle, another one was waiting for her. Just as Cher stood at the very top, Oscar in hand, praise pouring in, critics finally silent, her body began to betray her. It started as exhaustion, a heaviness that clung to her after long days on set. But it didn't go away, it worsened. The fatigue deepened into something more sinister. She was winded doing basic things, her energy collapsed without warning, and suddenly, the woman known for her fire couldn't keep her eyes open. Doctors initially brushed it off. Stress, overwork, depression, maybe even hypochondria, but Cher knew something was wrong, and she was right. She had contracted Epstein-Barr virus, a chronic illness that triggered devastating bouts of fatigue and weakness. It was invisible to everyone else, but to her, it was paralyzing. The woman who had just conquered Hollywood now couldn't get through the day without collapsing, and the stillness was terrifying. She'd spent her entire life moving, reinventing, running from pain, from poverty, from the fear of being forgotten. But now, there was no stage, no script, just her and her failing health. And for the first time in years, she was scared. But here's the thing about Cher, she doesn't break. She bends, she retreats, she mourns, but she always returns. And slowly, almost painfully, she did. Not in a splashy comeback, Not with a hash one single or a box office hit, but with resilience. Quiet, stubborn, blistering resilience. She started singing again, working again, reconnecting with her children. And by the time she came back into public view, there was a difference. She didn't just look strong, she was. Not because she had healed, but because she had endured. And in that endurance, Cher proved something even greater than fame. That the loudest strength is sometimes found in the years no one sees. Fame never made Cher untouchable, but motherhood, that made her vulnerable in a way that nothing else ever could. Her first child, Chastity Bono, now known as Chaz, was born during the height of the Sonny and Cher phenomenon. Cameras were everywhere. Interviews, photo ops, variety shows. It all looked like a picture-perfect family. But Cher was barely holding it all together behind the scenes. The pressures of performing left little room for bedtime stories or quiet conversations. And her second child, Elijah Blue, born during her turbulent marriage to Greg Allman, entered a world just as complicated. Cher tried to juggle stardom and parenting, but no matter how much money or help surrounded her, there were cracks, deep ones. In a quiet 2014 interview, he said it plainly. When you go to boarding school at 7, it's hard not to feel like you're being shunned. There was no malice in his voice, just quiet pain. The kind that settles in when the person you love is always half a world away. He admitted he still struggled with the distance, that even as an adult, he was still processing the weight of feeling like a second priority in his mother's life. And yet, he never stopped loving her. He described her with awe. She's really talented. She's gorgeous. I mean, she's Cher. What's not to love? That's the contradiction of being raised by an icon. You admire the star, but sometimes ache for the mother. But perhaps no chapter tested Cher's strength and love more than Chaz's transition. In the late 2000s, Chaz came forward publicly. He was transgender. He was no longer Chastity. He was Chaz. And for a woman long celebrated as a queer icon, the world assumed Cher would handle it with grace. But real life doesn't always match the headlines. Cher struggled. At first, she didn't understand. She felt confused, grief-stricken. She later admitted in interviews that she wrestled with a deep emotional dissonance. So you have to let go of who they were, and you have to understand and accept who they are becoming. It wasn't easy. She had to confront every idea she had of her child, every photo, every memory, every mother-daughter moment. And slowly, painfully, she had to transform that into something new. But as always, Cher chose love. She listened. She learned. She asked questions. She cried. And then she showed up. Not just privately, but publicly, loudly, defending Chaz's right to be himself, to be seen, to be happy. Their relationship wasn't perfect, but it evolved. It deepened. And today, Cher beams when she talks about Chaz. She calls him happy, strong, funny, the kind of child any mother would be proud of. And that, in itself, was a reinvention. Not for the cameras, not for a comeback, but for family. Because behind the feathers, the wigs, and the chart-topping reinventions, Cher was always just a mother trying to find her way. Through guilt, through growth, through unconditional love. Cher is now approaching 80. That number alone stops people. 80, and still performing, still sharp, funny, unapologetic, still Cher. Yes, because for her, aging was never a reason to fade. It was just another transformation. But behind the headlines, the Vegas residencies, and the endless headlines about ageless beauty, there's something else. A woman who has known deep, aching loneliness. She has outlived most of the people who helped shape her. Her mother, Georgia, once the headstrong dreamer who bounced through 7 marriages, passed in 2022. Cher was by her side until the very end. Greg Allman, the father of her second child, died in 2017. She flew across the country in private to say goodbye. Sonny Bono, the man who both made her and broke her, died in a tragic skiing accident in 1998. And when he died, Cher gave the eulogy herself. Her voice trembled, but her message was clear. He was the most unforgettable character I've ever met. It wasn't bitterness, it was grace. Over the years, Cher has become a symbol, a meme, a punchline for how long she's stayed relevant. But staying power isn't luck. It's pain. It's effort. It's waking up when no one calls and choosing to rebuild anyway. She's been misunderstood, mocked, rejected by the very industry that now calls her a legend. She's watched her kids struggle, watched love slip away, watched her body rebel against her spirit. And through all of it, she never lost that fire. The fire that was born the first time she had to hold her shoes together with rubber bands. The fire that got her through Sonny, through debt, through illness, through public humiliation. The fire that kept her alive when no one saw her worth but herself. That's her legacy. Not just the music, not just the movies, not the awards or the outfits. It's that fire. Cher doesn't just reinvent, she resurrects. Over and over and over again. So the next time someone tells you she's still around, remind them she never left. And if her story moved you, if you saw yourself in her resilience, her pain, or her defiance, then don't just scroll past. Say something. Leave a comment, share the story. Tell us what moment hit you hardest. Because behind every icon, there's a human story that demands to be heard. And Cher's is one of the greatest survival stories ever told. If Cher's story hit you in the heart, don't let it end here. Tell us in the comments, what moment moved you the most? Was it the loneliness, the comeback, the quiet strength? This isn't just about one woman. It's about survival, reinvention, and fire that never goes out. And if you want more true stories that go way beyond the headlines, subscribe, because we're just getting started.